But thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I apologize for the delay. My computer decided to restart. Of course.
I was recording a podcast for, hold on, I'm going to mute everybody but you. So I was recording a podcast with someone yesterday. I was like, I really wish that I was like 5 years younger and knew all of these things worked automatically. It's so frustrating. But anyway, we're so glad that you're here. Thanks for taking time. I know you've been so busy lately, so we're glad. We've been such big fans of yours for a while. For those of you who are new to the call, we opened this call up. This is something we do every Wednesday with our members, but we wanted to open it up just because of all that's going on with the coronavirus and just your specific expertise. But we also just are excited about learning about you because you have so much more. Obviously, we will focus today on COVID-19, but there's so much more to you. I mean, you're a scientist. You are a Latina influencer, Oprah says, which that's just so awesome, you know, and then you're a mama. And so anyway, we just want to know a lot of things about you. But I guess the first is, can you tell us what a genetic epidemiologist does?
Yeah, so thank you for that warm introduction. Gosh, and I wanted to take just a second to take a picture so that I can put it on my Instagram story so that people know that we're live right now, because people can join, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so hopefully I can do this quickly. Of course, my phone's like, I don't see that picture yet. I'll do it in a second. But so yes, I am so glad that you do what you do, because I think it's such a unique niche in the influencer space, and you provide such a great service to many people that I think don't necessarily think about all of the topics that you're presenting through your platform. So thank you for that. I am so glad that we have crossed paths, and appreciate all that that you do, and so grateful that you invited me to share on your platform a little bit about me. So genetic epidemiologists. So the field of epidemiology in general is about identifying risk for disease in human populations. So we basically track how diseases spread through human populations, and epidemiologists in particular will estimate using biostatistics and medical knowledge what that risk could be and how we reduce the risk of disease, right? So we use a lot of mathematical modeling, a lot of statistics to determine the odds of, for example, you getting diabetes, or you getting, in this case, COVID-19. A lot of epidemiologists tend to be housed within schools of public health, but you also see like hospital epidemiologists, which are responsible for reducing spread of disease in hospitals, like C. diff, for example, which is an infection that's very common in hospitals. And then, of course, the Centers for Disease Control, which has a big proportion of individuals who are epidemiologists that are responsible for reducing the spread of, like, polio, for example, in countries where it hasn't yet been eradicated. And so we largely are like disease detectives, I guess, to some extent. And we bridge many fields, but primarily biostatistics and biology and or medicine. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to the Gen Epi.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you. And how did you get into this? I mean, how did you decide this is something that you wanted to do with your life and your work?
Yeah, so I was very intent on going to medical school. I was a human biology major at Stanford in Palo Alto, California. And, like since the age of 8 was like, I'm going to be a physician, and, this is the path that I'm going to take. And then after I graduated from college, I went and worked with Dr. Fauci, who is the person that you see sort of front and center, along with Dr. Birx, and a lot of the press conferences and leading the response to COVID-19. And so I went and worked in this lab for 2 years. And I really loved and fell in love with research. And I thought, you know, this is one way that I can impact large populations, right, is by working in public health and epidemiology. And to some extent, honestly, some of that decision making came as a result of having spent so much time away from my family when I was studying in high school and in college, and it just felt like pursuing a path in medicine might mean that I would continue to spend time away from my family as an adult. And I really wanted to have the flexibility to be at home with my kids more so. And I really have a lot of respect for female physicians who don't have that choice, right? Who like are on call on the weekends and the evenings and are in clinic all day, for example, and may or may not be able to make some of the school functions and stuff like that. As an academic, I do have that flexibility. And so I am able to go to the parent-teacher conferences. I am able to, you know, leave work a little bit early and then continue some of my work in the evening, because a lot of my work is based on like running statistical programs on my computer or writing up those results in the form of papers and so forth. And so ultimately, as I learned more about what epidemiology was and public health, decided that for me, that was going to be the best balance of, you know, being able to enjoy family life alongside being fulfilled in terms of the work that I was going to do.
Right. And then how did you decide to create this platform and brand Chic in Academia?
So it's not very evident today because I kind of look like I'm cleaning. But I've been on Zoom calls since 8 a.m. this morning. And so it's just been like back to back. So I literally like got up, threw a headband on, and got to work. But so I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, and I moved to Alabama in 2008 so to start the PhD program at UAB. And in grad school, because I was also working full time, it was not uncommon for me to roll up into class wearing heels and like a dress and, you know, full face of makeup. And of course, like this was also pre-kids, right? So I had the time to straighten my hair and do a lot of things. So anyway, so a lot of my academic peers in academia, because it is sort of just, you know, work all of the time unless you decide to do something else like eat or, you know, go work out or whatever. You know, we tend to be more casual in our dress. And so my friends who worked in labs and who were my colleagues in courses and so forth would say, "You're so dressed up all of the time." And inevitably I'd say something like, "Oh, and you know, my dress was only $5, or I got these shoes at Ross and they were also only $5 and my whole outfit was only 20. And so eventually, after enough of those interactions, someone said, "Well, if you know, because I don't have the time to shop, if you wrote a blog about where you find these deals, I would totally read it." And my best friend and I were talking one day just on chat, and she said, "You need to start this blog today." And so she sent me like a link for WordPress, and she works in marketing. So she said, "Okay, all of your like handles need to be the same name. You need to, you know, upfront, like make sure that like your Instagram and your blog name match." And anyway, and so one day I just, you know, sort of started a blog and started, sorry?
When was this?
This was in 2013.
Okay. Wow.
So I was a postdoc by then. And Instagram, gosh, Instagram was so different because it was sort of, it wasn't the early stage of Instagram, but it was early enough that I remember posting that I had found a pair of Charles David heels for a penny, which was like those rare like moments for Nordstrom Rack, you know, where like they happened to price something for a penny. So I found one of those pairs and I posted it, and Nordstrom Rack reposted my picture on their account. And in an hour, I had gained 500 followers. I mean, like, this is how Instagram has changed over time. It's just like people were so actively looking to follow accounts that matched their interests.
Right.
That following behaviors were very different than they are now, where I feel like people are less likely to follow an account because they'll just make a mental note of it and come back to it if they want to, but maybe not necessarily want it on their feed all of the time.
Right. Yeah, that's what but people, because we just launched, we're learning a lot of different things, but we know how difficult it is to gain followers, and you've just done such a good job with your brand. And so we really appreciate what you've done. And on that note, and this will kind of shift us. So COVID-19, so much content. And that's the thing that we find is we are just over consumers of content. So everything on the wall set up behind the membership wall, we want people to consume slowly because that's what works in real life. Outside of the Wealth Edit, we have a private practice called Somerset Advisory where we, direct private clients on their wealth. But there's this gap that we see, particularly for women in the South, where we just don't want to talk about money, don't want to do these things. And there's so much content everywhere on the internet that it's hard to find a true source, a true voice. And so that's sort of where we are. But I think that's right now, there's so much information on COVID-19 that it's hard to find a true north. And so I don't know if you found, this is a fairly well-read audience. We understand the benefits of social distancing. Emily and I have to work together, so we are using hand sanitizer and not coughing on each other. But generally speaking, most of the people on this call are staying at home and have been for the good part of a month. So I guess to speak to that first, and then I want to ask you some questions specifically about Alabama.
Yeah. So one thing I will say, considering that background, is that Twitter has been a phenomenal source for me for getting information that comes straight from the source. So I started learning about SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, and the disease COVID-19 back in, I'd say, early January, maybe even late December. And it came from following Stat News, STAT. Helen Braswell is a writer, a scientific writer for Stat, and she was one of the first to break the news about this like really odd virus that was circulating in Wuhan and starting to trickle out of China, out of Wuhan into other parts of China. And follow a lot of colleagues who are based at Boston University, Harvard University, Johns Hopkins, who were noticing similar things and starting to kind of follow the data, right? And so I feel like, we didn't really start to hear about this from CDC and World Health Organization until in mainstream, possibly late January, maybe early February. But because I already had knowledge about it, covered it as early as January 26th, I think it was the date that my first blog post arrived. And in that time, had conversations with my husband, because obviously like things like this don't necessarily just have an impact for people's health. Like, as you know, it has an impact for people's finances and so forth. And so we very early had conversations about watching the market and refinancing if the rates dropped low enough, for example. We were prepared because he works in a retail environment. And so we were preparing, I should say, in case he was not going to be able to work. And so that financially, if it so happened, and it did happen, that people had to reduce their workload, that we would be financially okay, right? For at least 3 months, which is like the common advice that you get, right? And so I would say that Twitter has been a great source for that. I read a lot of journal articles. And so the New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA, Science Magazine, The Economist, So these are all places where you can get sort of breaking news about things that you should start to watch for. And, you know, and recognize how those things might affect every aspect of your life. And so we were, my husband and I, very cautious very early on in trying to prepare for this. And thankfully that preparedness paid off. In some of my earlier blog posts, I did center a lot of the messaging because what we were learning was that only older individuals seem to be mostly affected by COVID-19. We're seeing not quite the same trend in the US. We're seeing that younger people are also being hospitalized and affected. But early on in my blog post, I said, if you're older, please consider, you know, not stockpiling necessarily, but preparing yourself in case you're unable to leave your home. And that was the same advice that I gave to my parents who continue to live in Los Angeles and his parents who live in Wisconsin. And they're both grateful that they were prepared before things started to run out in grocery stores.
Yeah, that's a really good word. And so here we are in Alabama. You're in Alabama, I'm in Alabama, even though our reach is fairly national. So when we're talking to our private clients, members of the Wealth Edit, some of the questions we're getting about Alabama or the South in general is like, well, y'all aren't doing anything to prepare. And when I look at some of the statistical projections as far as COVID-19 and what we look like in Alabama, they look really bad. And I don't know if that's because from a statewide standpoint, we haven't had the shelter in place or stay-at-home orders, just depending on how you want to phrase that. But I mean, Jefferson County, we've been at home and businesses have been closed for weeks at this point. So, you know, how much of that is like, you know, the stigma of the South versus like, we really need to be doing more in the South?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that the only way you will know if you prepared well is by completely over preparing. And you will only know if you didn't prepare well when you start to see those numbers continue to climb and the death rate continue to increase. Unfortunately, I would say, you know, putting measures like closing down essential businesses is really important, and encouraging people to stay at home is also really important, but finding ways to make sure that people are adhering to those things are even more so important, because I think that to date, the communication has included some sense about how grave our situation is, but I'm not yet convinced, based on what I've seen anecdotally, that people truly understand the risk for themselves, and also understand the risk for our state as a whole, right? And I think that's sort of the cognitive dissonance that we're experiencing, is that people feel like they're not sick currently. I'm probably not going to get sick because of whatever behaviors they feel they exhibit that may prevent them from getting sick. But the reality is that the impact as a whole has severe economic implications. And the longer that people continue to not strictly adhere to these social distancing measures that are in place, the more there will be a need for these shelter in place or stay at home orders and quarantines and curfews to make sure that people are actually staying in their homes as much as possible. Florida, I think just today asked that people consider staying at home. So I think there's a version of a stay-at-home order for Florida. California instituted one pretty early, as well as like the Bay Area in California. They were among the first, and you can really see those numbers have not necessarily flattened, but they've very steadily increased. They have not exponentially increased, as opposed to New York, for example, where those stay-at-home orders came way beyond the point of communities, identification of community spread, which is the biggest issue that we see.
Yeah. And so how are we looking? So I guess everything I'm reading is saying that like 2 weeks, that's when we're probably going to peak in the US. Do you think that that is sounding correct from what you're reading as well?
Yeah, I think, so we saw our first case, I want to say it was March 13th. By that point, it is very likely that we had begun to see community spread in Alabama, because if you'll recall, all of the states that surrounded the state of Alabama had cases.
Yes.
A lot of what you will see in terms of numbers has to do with testing capacity, and we have been under capacity when it's come to testing. We still are very much only testing the people that are hospitalized, and there are some third-party testers that have also tested the general community, but we don't have a lot of information about what they have found, for example, especially among those that tested negative, because testing is only a cross-section of time. You could test negative today and be positive tomorrow, right? Or have been positive in the past and have infected people in the meantime. And so those are just some of the complications that we're experiencing. I would say that Alabama, based on projections, there is one website, the IHME, that has provided projections about when we expect to see our peak. Yes, I'd say between like 2 and 4 weeks is when we would expect to see it in Alabama. We are very much on the curve. So if you think about like those exponential curves, we are very much there. And recognize, for those that are listening, that the numbers that you see today for hospitalizations are individuals who became infected 1 to 2 weeks ago. So there's a lag time in the numbers that we are seeing. And so the effects of social distancing, we won't be able to see until, you know, this month, maybe early May.
Yes. And so what could, you know, and this is a little bit, lots of us have kids. So how are you talking, and I know you're a mom too, what are you telling your kids? You know, if we're aunts or uncles, how should we be talking to kids about this? Our kids aren't going back to school until August at this point. So how are you explaining this to your kids?
Yeah, so I took the opportunity last week to really break it down for them. So we had an entire science lesson about where the virus for COVID-19 comes from. You know, so far, all of the evidence suggests that it came from a bat. It's most similar to the SARS virus from the 2002, 2003 years. It's like a cousin of SARS, right? And so I explained to them that there is a virus that is new to humans, and we don't yet have built protection in our bodies for it. And so part of the reason that we are staying home is to slow or reduce the number of people that are being infected all at once, right? So we are, to some extent, also in the fight. Like, we are the helpers for the doctors and the nurses and all the other healthcare workers who are currently in hospitals, who want to make sure that they're able to take care of everyone that gets sick, but that can't take care of everyone that gets sick all at once. And so enabling the spread means that we all get to stay home for a few months and make sure that we can, you know, reduce the speed at which this is happening. And I think they got it. I think they got the helper part of it. I think they understood that, you know, like the cold or the flu, that people get sick and some people get sicker than others. And that by staying home, we're protecting ourselves, but we're also protecting other people by not getting them sick. And then ultimately protecting our healthcare workers in hospitals by not overwhelming them.
Yeah. And so you're home right now, it looks like.
Yes, we have been home since March 13th.
Oh.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you've been on Zoom calls all morning. Tell us like what your day looks like. What are you doing, and how are you involved in what's going on behind the scenes?
So there is a lot of work that's happening at UAB, and it's and beyond, actually. So I have, because I have been following this since January, and because part of what I do is break down these scientific concepts and share them with lay audiences so that we have increased knowledge in our communities. A lot of what we do as scientists, we're very good about talking to each other about in these sort of like very niche, complicated concepts and terminology, but we're less well adept at sharing that information with the lay community. So many of our patients and many of the people who really need this information, but don't necessarily get it from the the mouth of a scientist or the mouth of a physician. My task generally has been to synthesize all of the information that's out there about COVID-19 and create these blog posts that people can rely on for accurate and evidence-based information that is not sensationalized. And so a lot of my work has been aimed at providing like non-panicked messages about what's happening, making sure that we get the word out about, for example, like testing sites and what symptoms look like. There's currently a symptom tracker that we're launching that I've yet to share on Instagram, but basically UAB designed a system where you can go in and say, yes, I feel sick today, and this is the part of the state that I'm in, so that UAB can then determine, okay, this is where all of the resources need to go, or some of the resources need to go, because we haven't yet started testing there, or because we don't have increased capacity for testing. So alongside the COVID stuff, I also have my own research that I continue to do. And so that involves understanding the genetic predisposition to things like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and so forth. And so these are projects that are funded by the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, that are ongoing and that we're trying to figure out how to complete or continue to work on remotely. And so some of those calls are with investigators, some of the calls are with, like, I just came off of one on hypertension and COVID-19 and whether or not we should be taking people off their ACE inhibitors. The bottom line right now is no, you should not come off your ACE inhibitors if you're on them, and really speak to your doctor if you have COVID-19 about a treatment plan. But taking people off of those right now is more dangerous than keeping people on. And so there is a lot about just ongoing sort of the evolution of this science and how we're all going to play a part in shifting the resources and the power of men and women who are working on this, scientists and physicians, to now really understand what's happening with COVID and how it's going to impact health and how we can get a handle on it. Because really things, I think, from many people's perspectives, feel like they're spinning out of control. And so many of us are really just actively trying to make sure that we have the facts, that we move as quickly as possible, but in the most accurate way possible as well. And that takes a lot of round the clock reading and analyzing and modeling and that sort of thing.
Yeah. That's impressive. Yeah. Well, and okay, so I was gonna say, so you're working from home. Your
Yes.
kids at home.
Yes.
Is your husband at home?
So he is continuing to go to work some days. He is considered one of those like essential technology employees because he works for a cell phone company, an authorized retailer of Verizon. So he does continue to go to work some days. Today he happens to be off, so he is a huge help when he's home because he can take care of like the lunch. And even though we're not technically back to school per se, like we haven't yet adapted the or distance learning, we have maintained an hour of reading and math with the kids that happens sort of concurrent with lunch, and then we do recess. So every day we make sure, unless it's raining, to take them out and get some outdoor activity.
That's been what's really nice for our family that we just haven't had. I felt like we were rushing around so much, and we realized that isolation is a huge privilege that we have, and I'm acknowledging it as such. But it has been neat to see my kids come home and their clothes are all muddy, and it's just awesome. Like, it's so good. Well, I was going to ask you your pro tip for working from home with your spouse, because I'm about to write an article on that.
Oh yeah, so this morning he was on a conference call and I was on a conference call, and my office is on the part of the house where the kids sleep, and I am a loud talker, and tend to listen to my Zoom calls with the volume pretty high just so that I don't miss things. And so I had to go outside because he was in the kitchen. And so I'm outside, that, you know, there are birds chirping, like someone had a blower on. And so I'm trying to manage that. But I think the biggest thing that has helped is every day in the evening, we go over our schedule for the next day. And when we have calls planned and how that's going to fit in with what we have planned for the day, right? And so, and timing, because now the kids' sleep schedule is sort of very erratic. Like they're going to bed a lot later than they used to. And so mine are the type that will sleep in. They're not the kind that wake up every day at the same time, no matter what time they go to bed. So planning around when they're going to get up, when they're going to have breakfast, when we're going to do lunch and reading and all that stuff. The planning in the night before is very, very useful and helpful.
Yeah, this is, I think communication is big right now.
Yes.
Good right now. Okay, I'm going to unmute the line. Thank you so much. I'm going to unmute the line. I have a couple of things to say after we're done, but I just want to leave time for people who would like to ask a question to ask a question. So I'm unmuting the lines, everyone.
Okay.
I have lots of questions,
Yeah.
but they're not as pertinent to all this amazing conversation. You're such a fun inspiration for all of us who are wrangling so much. We're piecing together like 30-minute Zoom calls and 30-minute. Our kids haven't had their spring break like you guys have, and so they're my kids are doing Zoom calls with teachers from 8:30 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon some days, and so we're all trying to step on top of each other, or step over each other. Anyway, that's not a great question, but thank you so much for your amazing advice and inspiration today.
Thank you so much. And gosh, we haven't started. We start next Monday, so I am a little worried about that and how we're going to manage that. And we even talked about space. You know, I think space with trying to have so many people working at one time is a big issue. And if you have more than one kid, you know what their interactions can be like when they're in close proximity. So I can't get them to eat a meal without like complaining about someone's touching them or you know, someone's looking at them, and how to, you know, and so if you have two kids that are trying to get lessons at the same time in a confined space, I think that's so challenging. So kudos to you for leveraging that already, because I haven't quite gotten there yet.
I think we'll all learn starting next week if we haven't. Well, I wanted to mention one thing. Well, I wanted to ask you one last question. Well, let me make sure. Does anyone else have a question? Okay. What is your top money tip? Because you seem to be, I can just tell automatically that that you have familiarity with wealth. Our whole point is for women to talk about wealth, and so we just kind of want to ask you what your top tip is, and then I want to give a couple of just notes on the market really quickly. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I come from a family, and this isn't the best advice, obviously, but I come from a family where my dad said, if you can't pay for it in cash, then you can't afford it. And, you know, very early on, talked to me about not, you know, getting in over my head, always making sure that I could afford everything that I wanted, because wanting and needs are two different things. And then also, for as much as I love my husband, have always sort of had this mindset that whatever lifestyle we adapted, I had to be able to cover all of the expenses on my own. Like, should anything happen to him, should he lose his job, should we get a divorce, should like anything happen, that I would be able to maintain the lifestyle that we currently have on my own salary. And so we have been very cognizant of, you know, making decisions together. And he thinks I'm crazy for it. Like, he thinks that I should not think that way. He's like, there are two of us. Like, we should always depend on two. And I'm like, no, I mean, we just never know, right? So we have very much moved forward in that way. And I think that preparation also helped right now that he's not working as much. Like, he still is working, but not in the, like, you know, maximal capacity that he was in the past. I also wanted to just to throw this in there that, I have made sure we have the privilege and luxury of hiring someone to clean our home twice a month, and I have continued to pay her, even though we've been very, cognizant of social distancing. And so I have canceled, because now some of that I've taken on myself, but I continue to pay her just to make sure that she's not losing out on that income simply because I've decided to cancel. And I've tried to do that for all of the other services that I normally get as well. So those would be my tips.
Mm-hmm. No, I did check out your suggestion list of some of your purchases, and I went on the Amazon, and they were the cutest dresses, and they were like $25. I know. I think that's probably why people are so drawn to you too, because it's affordable and it's available to everybody, and it also doesn't make you feel guilty about it. So I put 2 of the dresses in my cart last night.
Oh, okay, good.
At a different time, we're going to have you back, and we're just going to talk all about clothes.
Yeah.
It's going to be much more fun.
I would love that. I am clothes with trends changing so often. I've always been more of a investor in handbags and things that will retain their value, because I've been very big on reselling. And so, that's another way. I think I view income as sort of a circular process. And so any money that comes out must come in some other way. And so anything that I buy, I try and make sure that I can either resell or that I'm not going to lose a lot of money on. And that's why I think of, clothes that are sort of trendy and fashionable as things that I can probably spend a little less on. But things like handbags, for example, which I can resell for at least 75% of the original value, worth investing.
We have we have lots of ideas on that, and we agree. So we haven't.
Good.
We launched, and we thought it was going to be all fun and games, and we were just going to talk about all the jewelry and all the clothes, and that is not what we've talked about at all, because we have more important issues to discuss right now. But one day we will. So thank you. I just want to, again, I know we've said this a lot, but we're so appreciative. And you have a show on Sunday nights, right? Or something that you do on Sunday nights, right?
Yes. So in January, I started something that's called Science Says Sunday. And I tackle health topics that sometimes are controversial, sometimes are not, like, vitamin D supplementation and the effects that it has on you during the winter, and how you tend to feel more tired, and sometimes your mood is depressed. And a lot of that has to do with vitamin D intake. But anyway, I try and tackle these sort of complex health topics in a very lay way, meaning that I try not to use any scientific language. I try to communicate them in ways that I would share with my mom, for example, who, could care less probably about scientific terminology and just wants to know the bottom line. And so that is published on my blog every Sunday. I have a synopsis on Instagram and Facebook, but really just want to be a source for as much of the evidence is out there for people who may have questions or have confusion about some of these things.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And so for all of our members, we are here, we exist, the Wealth Edit does, to kind of provide this link. A lot of times what would happen is women would come in, and we can't serve everybody that walks through the doors of Somerset, which is our private practice. But so I say, go to TD Ameritrade and open an account, go to Ellevest and open an account, and they wouldn't. And I think that women, we have this, we just follow these different paths, and that's what you'll see at the Wealth Edit, is that we put you on these different paths, and it's really curated content to deal with all of these areas of your life that actually are financial, but we don't think of them that way. Like hiring an interior designer, that is a financial decision. Buying a purse, that's a financial decision. We think of them differently, but really that's what they are. And so just starting that dialogue with women to talk about wealth. So if you aren't a member, I hope that you consider joining us. We have a lot of really great resources, particularly right now. I would start with financial minimalism, which you can buy as a course. So that's just something, it sounds like you have already started, when you saw the signs that things were starting to pick up, that you and your family reassessed that. And I think that that's a smart thing for everyone to do right now. I think too, keeping that emergency fund 3 to 6 months net is very important for everyone. Even if you have, let's just say, I heard this podcast last night, but I have credit card debt. It just doesn't, like, make your minimum payments right now. You don't want to be in a situation where you have zero cash. So, you know, just thinking about some of those things, and we are going to continue to tackle those things, but no, we are here and ask us questions, and we have this lively membership behind the membership wall that has a lot of things to say about the markets, all that's happening right now. So anyway, do you have anything else?
Okay. Thank you for today.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you, and we'll have you back to talk about much more fun things in the future.
I would love that. Thank you for what you do. I think it's such an important service to all women, because you're right. It's something that is so taboo to talk about, that people don't talk about it, and women especially. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, have a good day, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right. Bye.